num, num num, birdie num num.
When I have understanding of computers, I shall be the supreme being. God isn't interested in technology. He knows nothing of the potential of the microchip or the silicon revolution. Look how he spends his time. 43 species of parrots. Nipples for men.
Don't do that, Jesus Christ! You're gonna get me killed!
Out of here!
Oh, Billy.
I have nipples, Greg. Could you milk me?
Welcome, everybody, to Aeon Byte. Welcome to AB Live on this Mercury Day in this age of Hermes. Hope everybody's doing well. My name is Miguel Connor, and I am still your pompatus of Gnosis. And yes, you know, the Gnostic way is that everything you thought was real ends up being, a falsehood. And reality just keeps changing. That includes history, philosophy, science, and certainly the mind, our program mind. So this is certainly a theme of the show, but as always, it's these breaking down of the veils are always backed by more science and more research. We're just not throwing woo-woo stuff here, although sometimes it's valid, like our dreams. Wouldn't want to argue with Jung about the details of his dreams. So awesome. So as always, we are very excited to have the hardest working man on archaeology showbiz, and that is Bernie Taylor. Bernie, thank you for coming back.
Miguel, thanks for having me on such short notice. And the Moondog, you're here. Wasn't expecting it. Awesome. Graham, it's great to meet you. We're going to do some big stuff today. We are going to overturn everything we've ever thought about human history.
Whoa, so the Nephilim are out?
Oh, yeah, this is the big
Aliens
one.
are out? Oh, my God. Oh, this is a big one, even bigger than that. Well, let's do it. I'm excited. Yes. First, Graham, thanks for joining us. I know this is also in your wheelhouse, and your work on archaeology or alternative archaeology has been amazing. Good to see you here, Graham.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. It's a great pleasure to meet Bernie, and I am here to have him just blow my mind. It sounds like he's going to. Let's get it on.
Let's get it on. Weekend at Bernie's. And with us, too, glad to see the Moondog Vance able to make it. Vance, how are you doing?
Not too bad. I don't know too much about archaeology, but I do know a lot about archaeology. So,
well, there you go. That's good enough. Yes, and I see a good audience already lining up. Good to see the Mr. Coyotl, Eric, a few others there. James, how you doing, Paul? As always, if you have any questions, please super chat them. You can do it as low as $1, yada, yada. But that way you get separated now that our software can separate these things, and it's a lot easier for Vance instead of sort of panning for gold for questions in the audience while he's also trying to read comments and also make sure that the chat doesn't turn into the Chatico, the Watico of YouTube. So please super chat. I'll have some housekeeping things later on, but I think we should just get this party started. Well, Bernie, take us away. Blow our minds.
Absolutely. And we're going to do something. So in audio land, we're going to make this a special show for you. Right? You're going to hear things you've never heard before, and in podcast and YouTube land, you're going to get a little bit of a different show. And this story really connects back to my story, and I'm going to explain it from my perspective. About a month ago, it was actually June 4th or 5th, major media around the world told a story of Homo naledi in a cave in South Africa making art and burying their dead. And I have absolutely no idea about burying the dead. Funerary, grave robbing, all that stuff is not in my bailiwick. But there's another engravings or making the art did. And they initially published it in, I'm not sure published the right word, but this is what it is. And by the way, these authors, I have nothing against them. Okay. It's all kosher. Okay. And they published in three 3 papers in so-called pre-peer reviewed journals. Actually, a journal called bioRxiv. Never heard of this concept before. And they had 3 papers. 2 of them were about two of them covered the engravings, and 2 of them covered the funerary arrangements, and of course there's overlap of the one. And mainstream academia just screamed, absolutely screamed, because they went public with these pre-peer reviewed papers, and entire media, and the media didn't actually catch the difference between the two. And these are major players. Lee Berger, National Geographic fellow or something like that. Same thing with Augustin Fuentes and John Hawkes, the major player in paleoanthropology. So Lee Berger, John Hawkes, Augustin Fuentes, bioRxiv, major players. The media didn't even blink. It is what it is. Well, what does peer review mean? According to that journal, it says, in the process, the journal editors take advice from various experts called referees who have accessed the paper and may identify weaknesses in its assumptions, methods, and conclusions. So none of that was done. Absolutely none. But they did say, the authors, that was in a peer-reviewed journal, and that came out today. And in that peer-reviewed journal, it was thumbs down by all the reviewers, and so it didn't pass peer review in a peer-reviewed journal. And so there was so again today, the mainstream media is like, what the heck? Well, this team was in every meeting in the world. ABC News, I saw them on CNN, Discover Magazine, Mail and Guardian. Every media outlet in the world had these guys. Or it's Lee Berger on the program, and for 2 reasons. One is that he's promoting he has a new book coming out next month titled Cave of Bones, Lee Berger. And there's a Netflix documentary that drops on July 17th. And it's called Unknown and Cave of Bones. Unknown, Cave of Bones on Netflix. So pretty big. So they had the cart before the horse. I'm not sure if people can actually use that metaphor anymore, but really they had the cart before the horse. And they're expecting that the peer-reviewed paper would go through and everybody would be happy, and science said its thing. But I don't believe that the peer-reviewed paper would have picked up the real story anyway. So everybody, they can tune in to watch July 17th to watch Netflix documentary Unknown, Cave of Bones, and you will see a completely different story than I'm going to talk about today on this program, because that is what AM Bite is all about. Okay. Well, there was some called sort of peer-reviewed work on this, and archaeologist Flint Dibble, who's actually fairly famous. He's become famous in the last 7-8 months because he challenged Graham Hancock to debate on Joe Rogan, and Graham Hancock couldn't get anybody else to do it, and so Flint Dibble said, "I want to do this." He yelled and screamed on Twitter, and finally they said, "Let's do this." So it's maybe October, November, and Flint he's got his own channel, and I have no association with Flint. I have nothing for him. I have nothing against him. I'm really neutral in this whole thing. Flint has his own channel on Archaeology with Flint Dibble on YouTube, and he did an analysis of this whole Naledi bury the dead thing, and he said that there's not the evidence there. There's no there, which is ultimately how it came out with the peer-reviewed papers. But we're not going to talk about burial of the dead today. There's other research, or actually other rebuttals back when, and one was by some major Paleolithic archaeologists, what's called the conversation. And what these guys they've created, they didn't create it, but there is a platform for people to just debunk, discuss, whatever, the literature, and they could it's passed around. It's quite an interesting type of thing. But I have no connection with any of these people who did this, because this is not what I do. I'm not a bone collector. Rising Star Cave is the so-called cradle of humankind in South Africa, and it's on the eastern side of South Africa, sort of northeast of South Africa, which is really down pretty far south anyway. And when Berger had been in this cave and his team since 2013, and one of the things that the first people that went in were cavers under his supervision. They took pictures. The cavers went in again, took pictures. Then his son went in and took pictures. Well, the second time the second or the third time someone's in there, and the first time the pictures didn't work. The second time the pictures did work, and they noticed that they were broken bones. And this is a cave floor that has fossils all over it. And they ultimately found 30 specimens or so of Homo naledi, who's not. He was like, they say almost human, and it's not human, and it's something lost in the past. Has been the narrative for a long time. And what Berger said in interviews is that someone had been in that chamber and stepped on some of this material, and I didn't know how recently. Well, that person had been in the chamber, had to have been there after all this bones were fossilized. Okay, that's important. So Homo naledi didn't go in and step on their own bones and break them, because the individual stepped on fossilized bones. So somewhere between Homo naledi, which is 230 to 300,000 years ago, in this cave, someone had been in there, and they thought, well, maybe some cavers had been in there, but there was no other evidence that cavers. There was no flags. There was no Coke bottles. There was no cigarette wrappers and gum wrappers. There's nothing in there, but somebody had been in that cave, and so we're going to seek to answer the question today: who has been in that cave since 230,000 years ago, which is the last dating of Homo naledi in this chamber. Now, this Rising Star Cave complex is it's actually pretty big, and it drops down to the cave where you find these fossils and the engravings. It's about 30-40 meters, and there's multiple verticals and horizontal ways to get down there, and people could die. And when they sought a team to study this, they reached out and they actually asked for skinny people who had archaeology, caving, rock climbing experience, and ended up having a bunch of women, because women tend to be smaller on average. And then they found women who had been like an Outward Bound and all these sort of adventure programs.
Sorry, continue.
Pretty cool stuff. And so this is a pretty major cave system, and this is part of it. The cave system is in that area are mapped, and people go down and study them and all that sort of stuff, or people just splunkers who just do caving stuff. Now there are 3 panels in this Rising Star cave, and they had been going by. They were in the cave since 2013, but they'd only found these panels in the last year, meaning that they were walking by them or crawling by them for all those years. So they weren't obvious. They weren't obvious to them. And I'm not going to talk about one of the panels today because I haven't looked into it, but I'm going to talk about the other 2. One's called Panel A, and the one's called Panel B. Okay, and we're really going to talk about mostly Panel A today. And so it's kind of like a pillar on the side of both these are pillars on the side of the caverns, where you have to put your head around to see it. But they've been there, and people have been in that space since 2013, and they just didn't see it. Now, the first thing that came to the mind of these paleoanthropologists is, well, they've seen something like this before, because on this Rising Star Panel A, it's like a hashtag. And as we would say in today's world, but it's actually like 3 or 4 hashtags on top of each other, which is something we had seen back in 2012, 2013 at Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar. Okay, and which is a long way, of course, from South Africa. Gibraltar is on the southern tip of the Iberian Peninsula, not too far from the places that Miguel goes to visit. Well, the Gorham Cave etching is actually something that I've been studying. I mean, really studying since 2014, and I had an advantage over everybody else is that I bought the cleaned off image from the photographer. Everybody else, including this Homo naledi South African team, were using a dirt covered image, and so there's a clear difference. So any news story will have this dirt covered image, and well, it's like, you go into a store and there's ice over over the ice cream. You can't see what the ice cream is. Okay, and it's the same thing with this image. I've been studying this for years, and I've done many presentations and all conferences and things like this that included this Gorham Cave etching. And what the Gorham etching, the original team that went to this cave, they were experts. They were experts on Neanderthals, and they believe that it was Neanderthal because they're experts. They found it, therefore it must be Neanderthal. And well, we can actually, it's a pretty cool image. You can scale it to 2 hands. That's the size of this Gorham etching. And it's actually the same size as the Homonelli hashtag on top of the hashtag on top of the hashtag type of thing. And they said it was, so I said that they said it was Neanderthals because they were experts in Neanderthal, but they kind of fudged the numbers a little bit. Okay, I'm going to explain how that works. Is that this is a cave. This is a cave, and it's in the Rock of Gibraltar. Okay, it's right at water level where we were in the last conversation with Miguel a few months ago, and it runs about 25 meters from the top where this engraving is down to the bottom. And they had figured out the stratigraphy based on artifacts and things like that. And there was nobody really argues about the stratigraphy. But what these guys did is they said that the sediments went up on the side, on this lip, or the deeper sediments 40,000 years ago, up on the side and went over on top of this platform where this engraving, because it's on a platform, whereas the sediments that were 35,000 years ago were on top of those. And it actually, and the reason why they were trying to push for this 40,000 years ago was 35,000 years ago, we have documented evidence of Homo sapiens, modern humans, in Europe. And at that time, the dividing line between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals was about 40,000 years. So these guys could say, well, we in this cave system, we have had Neanderthal remains, and we have this sediment layer that takes us up to 39,000 years, which is fudging it. But it doesn't, in the end, it doesn't really make any difference. But that's what they did. And they said Neanderthal cave art. But there were archaeologists, anthropologists who said bullshit. And one of them was Harold Dibble. Remember Flint Dibble a few minutes ago? Well, Harold Dibble was recently deceased. He said it takes more than a few scratches, deliberate or not, to identify symbolic behavior on the part of Neanderthals. He did like the counter story in a Nature piece. And so there are a lot of people who said BS. And I was interested in this from the hashtag and other sorts of things. Well, that whole 39,000 years ago thing is totally moot because we're now at 54,000 years ago as modern humans in Europe. So nobody can say, well, there weren't modern humans here, therefore at 39, because that story doesn't work anymore. Of course, we're now at 54,000 years ago. And so now people, if you're going to call something Neanderthal, you got to be above 54,000 years ago until somebody finds more evidence, bone evidence that Homo sapiens were in Europe at that time. It'll be older than that. It'll be pushed back. But that's basically how this narrative works in this cave art dating. So what is the dating of these panels, panel A and panel B, in this Rising Star Cave in South Africa? Okay, so what the authors of the study, Lee Berger, Augustine Fuentes, and John Hawkes, the primary authors, they said that it is the same context. It is the same as the fossils on the bottom of the cave. And they said nobody has been in the cave since then, except there's that question mark about those broken fossil bones. Who broke the bones? And what they did is they looked at the Gorham etching, the hashtag, and they said it doesn't really overlap. It can't be the same thing, but they're both intentional symbology. Okay. And by the way, this Gorham etching team, about 2018, 2019, they were pressured by their peers who had seen my work to say this isn't Neanderthals anymore, and unrelated to the dating. And they said, well, it's Neanderthal, human, Homo sapiens hybrids, which is 4% of everybody in Europe today. So they actually backed off on that. And the people who did the studies, some major players, they said, well, we were just checking if it was made by humans, intentional humans versus by the weather or the waves and things like that. So they backed off on that whole thing. So nobody in that circle currently believes that's Neanderthal for a lot of reasons, including my work. But that the people in South Africa never got the story because they're paleoanthropologists. Where these people work on the cave art in the Iberian Peninsula, they're archaeologists, anthropologists. They're interested in the human culture, whereas the paleoanthropologists are interested in bones. That's what they do. They're bone people. Okay. And there's a long way from the South Africa Gorham's Cave in and it's 2,000 hours, 2,000 hours. And so you can say if you did 10 hours a day, you got 200 days. Now, is 200 days a very long time to travel? I don't think so. And the reason why Saharan Tuareg people, the blue people, we say, they migrate on foot over 1,000 miles every year. So the distance, and this is going around the Sahara. So that really, for people who do a lot of walking, to go from Gibraltar to South Africa isn't that far. In our way of seeing the world, it is a really long way. Now, here's a kind of a sidetrack story. Is when I was writing, after I wrote my book before Biological Time, a woman contacted me from the UK, and I thought she was freaking crazy. I tell you, her name was, I think it was Fiona Campbell, and she asked me all these kind of questions. And she started a school to teach people how to do everything I do. I talked about Biological Time, about having the rhythms of nature how to time by the sun and the moon and all that sort of stuff. And she, people would go to her camp and they learned how to do this stuff. I thought she was freaking nuts. And then I actually looked her up. And well, Fiona Campbell was a long distance walker. She was the first person, a woman, to walk around the world. Of course, there had to be a few boat rides in between there, but she had walked across all the continents. So this is something people have done. Something still do. People still walk those different distances. Now, when I looked at this Rising Star cave, the panel A, right away, a bear jumped out at me. Okay. And it was a standing bear, and it's looking to like the viewer's right, and you can see it from the kind of the breasts up, and it's in profile. It's clearly a bear. I mean, it's not. And then I saw it quickly, like minutes later, I saw another bear, and it's a big bear head in profile, and it's like the most awesome picture of image of a bear I've ever seen. It is so cool. And so these are the authors of those pre-peer reviewed, pre-peer reviewed, and the peer reviewed papers. I believe is the same paper. They didn't look at this because they didn't look deeply into these images because they were interested in proving it was Homo naledi. There was no previous work of art for Homo naledi, so there's nothing to reference against it. So they never looked. They absolutely never looked. And that's just people kind of they had a hypothesis they wanted to prove, and that came. They were leaning in a direction. They jumped into it, and that is what these peer-reviewed papers came out and said. You guys got to look at the null hypothesis. So yeah, there's bears on these things. And there's also bears on the Gorham etching up in Gibraltar. In fact, there's a whole series of bears. I don't think we ever did it on this program, but you got a mama bear, and she got some cubs between her legs, and then it turns, and you see these yearling bears, much larger heads, and then it turns again, and then you see a mother bear with her claws around a juvenile. And it's really what we're looking at is we're looking at the bears going through the seasons. This is actually Ursa Major, but that's another program for another day that we can do. Okay. And there's another cave that we bring into the story here that we've talked about a lot in this program. It's the Gallery of Dis at El Castillo Cave in Cantabria, Spain, which is in the north of Spain. It's as far north as you can get in Spain. And on the Gallery of Dis, you also have this mother bear and her cubs, really cool. And the mother bear is looking at the cubs climbing, because in bear psychology, at some point the cubs need to move on. And so throughout the life of the cubs, the mother teaches them you climb the tree for safety. And at some point she says to them, she scares them up the tree and she runs away. And it's just, that is how bears work. So when we talk about protective mother bears, yeah, sort of. Okay. Well, on this panel A, in the Homo naledi cave, this rising star cave, or cave of bones, there's two elephants, and they're really, really cool. And these guys missed it as well. And there's a much larger elephant, presumably the mother, and the juvenile, about a quarter, maybe a fourth of the size, shorter from the head. Awesome image, and they're not kind of nuzzled up together, that sort of stuff. And we've been to the Gallery of Dis in the past on this program. We talked about the African elephants, and we have this elephant. When you turn your head to the left, you see that it's drinking. You turn your head to the right, it's got the ear and the trunk raised. So again, we have elephants again. And on the Gallery of Dis, on the Gorham etching, we have elephants as well. And we have a series of elephants with a juvenile and two adults. And how the artist created these images is they followed they etched lines in the so-called hashtag, but they also separated them by coloration. So they had some way of putting coloration down on this. And the only way you can figure these three out is first you have to find the darker juvenile, and then you draw it out, and then you say, oh, there's another one, and then there's another one. So you can actually pull off three elephants with their heads. Now, these elephants are interesting because they have flat heads, so that they are not straight tusked elephants from Europe. These are African elephants. That's really important. And on this, we go back to the Hominoleti cave in South Africa, cave of bones. We find giraffes. And when I first looked at the giraffe image, I was like, what the heck? I wasn't really sure how it worked. And what we have is we have a mother giraffe laying on her side, and her juvenile, possibly a newborn. I mean, this just could be like, Mazel tov, right? It's a birth. And we have this juvenile kind of leaning against her head, and so they're sleeping together, bedded down. Awesome, like absolutely awesome image, and we can see the horns for the juvenile, and we can see horns and ears for the mother, and some bit of the neck for the mother. Incredible image. And on panel B in this Ride Star cave, which we haven't touched on yet before, is that we find a giraffe with her head up, and so like she's drinking or something. And this image has a lot of dirt on it, and so this particular giraffe head or neck to head is pretty clear. And there's some other images potentially are giraffes as well just below her, but we can't see them because they're a little dirty. And these guys, they've seen everything that we're talking about today, the authors, and I was listening to an interview yesterday or 2 days ago that one of the authors did, and they have National Geographic going down there to take more pictures. Of course they are. Okay, because they know the story. Now, we've talked about the Gallery of Discs in the past, today, and this giraffe is a juvenile with her neck goes around the mother. And so it's the same scene of the mother and the juvenile giraffe. And the mother's protecting her young. And on the Gorham etching in Gibraltar, we have the same scene as well. We have a larger and a small giraffe, and the etching, these hashtag etchings partially create the necks, and the artists use coloration as well. And how they got all these colors on this thing is completely unknown, because after they decided it was they decided it was Neanderthal, they took few quick pictures, they covered it up, and nobody has ever studied this thing again except me. I'm literally the only one in the world who has studied this thing, and which is creating a bit of a problem now, because these people down South Africa were relying on the study of the Gibraltar Gorham etching, which is not what it is. Well, there's other characters on these panels, and one of them for this Hominoleti cave is a whale in one direction and a shark in the other. So the Moondog and Miguel, have we ever seen anything like this before?
Maybe when I did acid in high school. Yeah.
No, Moondog, you're up next. What are you? So the same animal.
I don't remember that figure. I don't remember that
something
figure.
Similar. So we have two marine animals going in this opposite directions, but they overlap each other. And
Oh, you're talking about the Pisces fishes.
Absolutely. So we're gonna. I gotta hang on a second. Yes. And so that's what we're looking at here. And we can see that, we know that because in the last episode we did, we had the humpback whale, the breaching humpback whale, that overlapped with the bottlenose dolphin that became Pisces in the night sky. And so that the artist / navigator was taking the dolphin south on his journey through the night sky in the pareidolia, and was taking the whale north. And so we have the same image, except it's in the Hominoleti cave, except it's a shark in one direction and a whale in the other. And on this Gorham etching up in Gibraltar, we have it's a flying fish, and in one direction we have a whale in the other. And the flying fish, you've seen them if you've gone to Hawaii, and you go out like a party boat or something, and they fly and they land on the deck and they get stuck there. That's the only place I've ever seen them, but they're really cool. And so these guys, the whole point of all these fish, except the shark, is that they don't jump out very high out of the water. They all jump out of the water except for the shark. So you can see them above the surface and below the surface. And on this panel A in the Rising Star Cave, a cave of bones, we find a bird popping out of an egg, which is really cool because it tells us that this is a springtime scene in that part of the world. So the artist is time factoring it. And we find another on the further up on that panel. We find a standing bird, which I don't know what it is, and I didn't know what the one popping out of the egg is either. But if somebody out there in podcast land ever, is pretty good in the Audubon world, let me know. So I want to know. And I can't figure it out, but it's definitely standing. I don't know if it's the other one that's popping out of an egg. But on the gallery of this, we have a juvenile eagle, fledgling eagle, that stands on the shoulder of the teacher. And he becomes the teacher, sort of type of thing. And the teacher speaks into the ear of the apprentice. So that's, again, the time factoring. And that one we know we can determine as a mid-June time period based on the life history or stage of the eagle. And also on the gallery, this is an ostrich. And I think we talked about the ostrich like maybe 2 years ago, but there's an ostrich, so standing bird. And we go back to the Rising Star Cave in Cave of Bones in South Africa. We have a horse. It's an equine. It's presumably a female. And there is a second horse on this one. And the second horse there's a very narrow muzzle that slips in just under her ear, the right ear of the horse, and it comes across her face. And so what we have is the mare and her foal, and one is overlapping the other. And there's actually, on the image, you can actually see there's 2 backs for the horses. And if you go on my webpage, you'll I'll eventually draw out the second horse, the juvenile, the foal. But so again, we have this relationship between 2 animals. And in Europe, the most commonly depicted animal on upper cave art is a horse, and most commonly a female. So this falls into that. Now, I don't know if there were any horses per se in South Africa during this time period, but there were zebra. This doesn't look like a zebra. And it's interesting. But on the gallery of disc, we talked the last session about the horse, the speckled mare. Really cool image, and we said it came out of the pareidolia. And at Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar we also have this mare who pops out of she's within the hashtag lines. 3 lines form her back and her belly, and 2 other features come out for her 4 legs and her head. And her mouth is open. She's just not happy. She's got her head turned. And I'm not sure if we ever talked about in this program, but that Gorham etching is based on pareidolia at a mountain called Mulhassan, which is probably about maybe 30, 40 miles away from Gibraltar. And it's the same hashtag. It's the same there's another pareidolia. There's a pareidolia horse in the mountain that we can again find on this Gorham etching. And Mulhassan is the highest, tallest mountain on the Iberian Peninsula. And so it's really cool that we find this relationship between the pareidolia in the mountains and the cave art, just as we found in the last session for the gallery of discs. And we looked at the Rock of Gibraltar and how they found the pareidolia of the animals within that. So there's relationships, and we should find the same thing in the Rising Star Cave in South Africa, this Cave of Bones. And I actually have it, to be honest with you, but I don't have the images to pull it off in a presentation yet. I'm searching for the right images. Now, there's something very interesting between the Gorham Cave etching in Gibraltar and this Rising Star Cave panel A, that the authors of the 3 papers, both the pre-peer reviewed and the peer-reviewed papers, didn't recognize, because they didn't recognize any of the characters. If they recognized the characters in this, they would have seen that you've got the head of the horse, the mare, on one end of the panel, and on the other end you have going left to right, you have the heads of the elephants and the trunks going down, and below the heads of the elephants, trunks going down, you have the giraffes, the heads of the giraffes, and the necks of the giraffes go through this narrow hashtag lines. And then there's a bear. The mother bear, the profile of the mother bear is just below them, although it's upside down relative to each other, and that's important. We'll have to talk about that in another podcast because it's an animal we have to wrap our heads around. And then we find both the whale and the other marine animal, whether it be a shark or it be a flying fish. We find them in the exact same positions relative to each other within the same hashtag lines on both panels. So this is like statistically, it's impossible that this happened by force of nature or in Bernie's imagination, because it's just impossible that all these characters are in the same order. So then the question be asked, this is the question of humanity itself. Berger said in an interview, someone had been in that chamber and stepped on some of this material, and I didn't know how recently. So was it 36,000 years ago at the same time as the Gorham etching? Because we have exactly the same art. It is exactly the same. It's the same characters in the same order, in the same orientations, in the same hashtags. And it also overlaps character-wise with the gallery disc. The gallery disc is a rectangle where these other two panels are squares. And so the arrangement is slightly different as we look at it. So the question going back is, well, is how far is Gibraltar from the Rising Star Cave in South Africa? Well, it's 2,000-hour walk in present times. Is that far to travel? And the answer is, well, the Tuareg do, pretty much half that distance every year. So it isn't that far to travel. And Fiona Campbell walked around all the continents on the world, and she did most of those by herself. So it isn't that far. But it changes this. It asks this question of, who are we? Did we emerge as modern humans with art in Europe, or did we emerge in South Africa as modern humans? Well, it's been a big question, but something else happened about 2021. There was cave art found in Indonesia, in Swaziland, that dated to 45,000 years ago. So we've just added a new element to this. So roughly in the same time period as European cave art, we have in Indonesia. So where did that come from? So people have said, well, maybe they came from Africa, and from Africa going east towards Indonesia and north towards Europe, and that's how you can explain all this sort of stuff. Well, could that origin point be in South Africa? So is that where art and humanity, mythology as we know it, emerged from? I mean, that's quite the story. And so if you look, we think about, in your heads, think of a world map of where Indonesia is, which is just north of Australia, South Africa, way across the Indian Ocean, and Iberian Peninsula, Gibraltar, is way above Africa. Any way you look at that, it is a long freaking way. It's a long way, but the time periods overlap. And so, we can look at the gallery of the Gorham etching. We can the Hominoleti panel, Cave of Bones. They're exactly the same. These people, they could have known each other. That's how exactly they might have been the same person. It's possible, but these people either knew each other, they were cousins, they were within a generation apart or something, because it's exactly the same information scaled in the same way. It's impossible that these people are distant. And then we drop in this Indonesia story from 2021, and we're like, whoa, where have we been coming and going from 36,000 and older years ago? Were there trade routes? Well, I'd say darn right there were. And there were these people knew each other. They traveled around, they fit their cousins and their relatives and their distant uncles and all that sort of stuff. This is a story that we have been a world people for at least Eurasia, Europe, and Australia regions. We have been a world people for a long, long, long time, and we've been sharing information back and forth. And so we talked about the giraffes on both the El Castillo Cave, the Gibraltar, the Gorham's Cave, Gibraltar, and the South African cave. So years ago, back in 2014, identified the giraffe on the Gird discs. And I was working with a wildlife biologist named George Schaller, and George Schaller was the mentor of Jane Goodall. So you can kind of put like, relative scale, right? And I met George when I lived in China in my mid-20s. He didn't remember me. I remembered him. I reached out to him, and he helped me out. And what George said when he saw the Gird giraffe, he said, "That's a Maasai giraffe." And he actually emailed it to me. So that's a Maasai giraffe. And I was not ready to go there. I was good with giraffes because there's giraffes out here in Morocco now, and they're in North Africa. And I was just fine with giraffes being, a few hundred miles away from this rock art, cave art. But I wasn't ready for Maasai giraffes in South Africa to show up in European upper Coast cave art. Totally blew my mind. So when I saw the giraffe on this panel, the first thing I thought about was George was right. And it was just like it just blew my mind. And I'm going to tell you, so that we went back and forth. Did Maasai giraffes, did they migrate north into the Sahara where, and that was feasible, perfectly. Yeah. But that's not the story. The cave artists in South Africa had seen Maasai giraffes. The cave artists in Europe and in Iberian Peninsula, both at El Castillo Cave and Gibraltar, had seen Maasai giraffes. Absolutely amazing story. And so going back to the blue people of the Sahara, they migrate over 1,000 miles each year on foot, which puts this into perspective. And my friend Fiona Campbell, who walked around the world and wrote a book based on my book Biology, how people can live in the wild. So how did people miss this? And this is a really important concept. So Bernie doesn't just dream this stuff up. Bernie doesn't see things that other people don't see. And well, there's other people that see this stuff too. And there's a test for this. And the test is called embedded figures test. And in embedded figures test, you have you've actually seen these things in a non-psychological way. In the old days, you went to the diner. One side is math problems. The other side, you got to find the animals in the forest, right? Well, if you're good at math, you stick to one side, right? And the other side, if you're good at pictures, you just go to the other. And I'm not going to ask you guys which ones you did. Well, that's effectively an embedded figures test, except it's a little more, they're geometric figures, and they time you how quickly you can do them. And a long time ago, there was at University of Oregon, they were testing people for something, and a friend said, "You should go test it. Just, they need volunteers." So I went down to University of Oregon, they tested me, and I remember doing an embedded figures test. And the woman, the grad student across the table, timed, and she timed me twice, and then she left the room, and she brought in a whole bunch of other people. And she did it again. This is a slightly different test with geometric figures. And they all looked over, and then they had me do these other tests. And they all watched me do the test. They never told me what they found because it was like a blind test, right? And so one of the other tests they actually asked me to do was I played like Space Invaders computer game. And they wanted to see how fast I did it because they believe that picture thinking was also tied, not just in embedded figures test, you can find these characters very quickly, but you also have fast eye-hand coordination. And but I never became a gamer, like a real life gamer, and it didn't work out. But they asked other questions as well. We'll talk about in another episode. And we have these images out there. There's one out on the internet. There's an elephant with a trunk, and there's other animals that are easily identifiable. And most people get the elephant, but they don't get like the trunk is actually a dolphin, and that between the legs of the crocodile, and they get there's a donkey under the body of the elephant, but they don't get there's a dog under there and a cat. But these are images, these are tests that we do all the time in our world. They're embedded figures tests, and if you're not good at that stuff, well, you go do the math problems because they're different skill sets. And there's a Canadian artist, Bev Doolittle, and she does these images of animals that overlap each other in different similar colored environments to the animals. And she did this one called Pintos, and people can see it out there. You type in Pintos, Bev Doolittle, and you can see all these horses that overlap with each other. And the horses, you got to count the horses. And it's pretty tricky to do because they blend in with the red, the brownish red, and they blend in with the white snow. Really cool image. And she does other ones at the woodlands, and you got to figure out how many Native Americans are in the picture and what else is there. And so people can go Woodland Encounter, Google it, Bev Doodle, really cool stuff. And you can kind of see a perspective of, and bring your kids in, bring your spouse, your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, and you ask them what they see. And you'll see that people pick up things more quickly than others. And it doesn't mean anybody's smarter or dumber than the other. It's a different way of seeing the world. In this case, it's about seeing the trees through the forest. People always say, well, you got to see the forest through the trees, right? No. In this case, you've got to see the trees through the forest. And what these paleoanthropologists, these bone guys in South Africa were doing, and no offense to bone guys, is they were not seeing the trees through the forest. They were dead set on Homo naledi being who made this art, and it was obviously human made. Oh, actually, it was made by hands of somebody with a tool, because basically the characters. And they said, okay, we're good. This is Homo naledi. We have the contextual evidence from these fossils, and we're going to go to free peer review, book deal, Cave of Bones, Netflix, Unknown Cave of Bones, and we're going to just rip through this. Well, if I was running the show, which I never would be, because I'm not like those political types who can do that, is I would be recruiting not just skinny people who are mountain climbers and cavers, anthropologists, but I would be recruiting people who are neurodiverse. Okay, we've heard about all kinds of diversity the last few years, and you got to have this percent in that industry and this percent. I mean, neurodiversity is like, diversity is all over there. What people always forget is that there's another kind of diversity. It's called neurodiversity, and that's how people interpret information. Okay, so major picture thinkers in today's work, and like say in recent times, was Walt Disney. Disney would have aced an EFT test. Spielberg would do it as well, because they're visual people. They see the picture before they take it. They see all the details of the picture before they take it. And that has to do with the way our brains are wired. There's a spectrum. And some people are just good at this than others. So I did a blog. I actually did the first episode part of a 3-part blog, and it's on my page beforeorion.com. People could see all the images. And the first one is titled Rising Star Cave Engravings, the Underworld, because we went to the underworld in this program today. And the next two to follow are the terrestrial plane, which is very similar to what we talked about in the last episode, and the sky world, which is again ties into that last world. And so what I'm going to do in these next two blogs, and maybe Miguel will even invite me back on to do another show and tell, is that I'm going to walk through exactly what we did in the last episode of Aeon Bite. We walked through the pareidolia, the Rock of Gibraltar, and how these animals and images all tie together. Not just on this Rising Star Cave, but I'm going to bring in the Garb disc, going to bring the Gorham etching as well. We're going to show that these are in fact the same people. And these people, they not just drew the same animals in the same order on their panels, but their sources were in fact the same. Their pareidolia geological sources were in fact the same. And that's pretty that is
that's pretty mind-blowing.
So Graham,
wait, hold on. Before we do this, let everybody take a little break just to breathe in, and then I want to get Graham here. It's pretty amazing. I wonder, so in those days, like with Uber, you'd have to get on somebody's back and they'd take you to South Africa. That's how it worked. But I wanted to go ahead.
They didn't eat as many Fritos.
Yeah, exactly. They were actually in shape. But yeah, little house cleaning, housekeeping, whatever you want to call it. But for those of you who might be interested, yes, because of demand, the Astronosis 2 Meet the Archons conference is now available for download. It's mind-blowing, again, with more than 12 hours with some of the greatest experts and scholars in Gnosticism discussing archons and everything else. You can get it, you can stream it through video, you can get it through audio, and the feedback has been incredible, both on the the conference and also the presentations that are now available. I will, unless there is some great sponsor, I will never make these public. And if you get these and downloads, the funds will be going to support next year's conference. So we are already planning Astronosis 3. I am making these available if you want to purchase them. And you'll have an amazing experience, especially when it comes to the archons, extraterrestrials, astrotheology, and incredible guests from Chris Knowles, April DeConnick, Richard Smalley, Mitch Horowitz. I did a presentation, Stephen Snyder, James True, Sarah Elkady, and our discussion panel. So again, you can now stream the audio or video for Astronosis. I'll have it on the show notes or just message me. Now available. Other than that, blah, 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 blah. We got some great shows coming. Next week, we will have a show on Artemis, the goddess Artemis. She is some amazing things have been hitting me about Artemis, which I'll share next week. And I feel this very dangerous goddess needs to be addressed finally on Aeon Byte from a different standpoint. So you'll love it. So I think that's it. Yeah, please support. Appreciate the super chats we've had so far. Chester, thank you. James, thank you. Chris, thank you for the support. Yeah, it helps keep the light of the pleroma going. Please support, even if it's just like, sharing, subscribe, whatever you can do really, really helps. And we appreciate your help. So I think that's it for housekeeping. Graham, what do you think?
I was going to say, this is some good stuff from Bernie here. I'm just still processing and trying to put it into context, you know.
Welcome to the Bernie Sphere.
Yeah. No, it's one of those where it sounds like what you're saying is that it was the Homo sapiens, you know, from the Aurignacian culture, you know, roughly, 35,000 or so years ago, that carved the cave in South Africa as well as the cave in Spain. Is that right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. I was going to say that doesn't rule out Homo naledi for the early artistry, because if I remember right, another finding that they had was in a seaside cave, they found like shells that had been using to mix and store like ochre dyes, and it was almost like a little art studio that was dating from about the time of Homo naledi. And
yeah, that one is actually like 80 to 90,000 years ago. So that we're in Homo sapien territory at that time. Yeah, they're saying Homo naledi is 230 to 330,000 years ago. Yeah, it's in South Africa. So people were mixing pigments and shells, and there's definite markings on rocks. Without it, and I have a theory about that, hypothesis about that too. But yeah, that wouldn't have been Homo naledi. That was good old Homo sapiens. The four of us.
I was going to say the tie-in I also wonder is where the Denisovans might fit in here as well, because they would have been.
Oh yeah,
they had a lot of overlap from the previous culture. The Mustarian culture was kind of both Neanderthal and Homo sapiens. It's almost a shared culture between the two, and the Aurignacian was the child culture after that one. And the other question I had, a couple other ones, real quick observations, is any thoughts on the possible similarities, this being like some sort of, archaeoastrology kind of thing, where they're doing the constellations, and since the constellations would be the same, regardless of where you are on Earth, that could be there. And the other one is, what are your thoughts on the proposed decipherment of the cave paintings by Ben Bacon and Company from earlier this year?
Yeah, that's we're going to start right there. That's a good one. So number one is Ben Bacon's team did not decipher anything. They ripped off my work. He's tied with Durham University, and I first took it to the we could have done a whole program on this one. I've done podcasts on this. Back in 2004, I released Biological Time, And the biological time was how plants and animals are timed. I showed that they're timed by light dark signals of both the sun and the moon, and that it sets up a whole timing mechanism for basically everything, in fauna life. And I tied into Native American traditions, and I tied into Paleolithic cave art. And I wrote papers after that in so-called peer-reviewed literature, did conference presentations. And then 2017, I came back and I updated my work, did more presentations on that. But I really went into this kind of stuff we're doing right now. Well, my work was in Wikipedia. Okay, I mean, it's all over the freaking place. And a year before Ben Bacon's and friends, a year before they went to print, they met with Nova, which is PBS, BBC. It's kind of the U.S. version of BBC. And the Nova editor, they wanted to presumably do a documentary, and told them no, because Bernie did this back in 2004. You don't give him any credit for that. And not only that, but Bernie gave credit to Native American cultures who had this information before. So there's the people at Durham University, and Ben Bacon's on the outside, but he's on the team. They tried to pull this thing off that they invented it. He as a woodworker, dreamed in his head all this stuff. Never happened. Never absolutely happened. And so so it came out like in early January, and it popped in the morning in the UK, and it was nighttime out here. And archaeologists reached out to me. They say, "Hey, Bernie, what do you know about this? Are you part of this project?" Because everybody knew I did this back in 2004. I kind of moved on and did multiple podcasts though. And so I called them out on it. I called out the journal. I said, "What the heck's going on here? And what happened?" So first I said, "Let's work this out." Why don't we do journal editor says, "Well, I need to investigate this." So he basically did an investigation. The results of investigation were about how the journal is not liable for intellectual property claims. So they came up with that it was entirely legal defense. And he actually says it's a legal defense. Okay. And so the journal the journal was not protecting the readers or the scientific community, was protecting themselves. This is a Cambridge Archaeological Journal, which is the biggest archaeology journal in the world. There's no more mainstream than Cambridge Archaeological Journal. And so I said, "Okay, let's work this out. I'm obviously first." And they said, "Well, this book doesn't count, and this paper doesn't count," and blank. So they tried to like play this whole freaking number game, which is it's totally bogus. God. And so I said, "Let's work this out. Here are some options. Why don't you let me offer another paper in my work for the journal, and you can review it, have a peer review, and if it works, you do it, or have me speak. Let's go do that. Fly to the Cambridge, and I'll do a presentation on my work that is not this work. So we're not going to create any conflict." They basically said, "Go to hell." And I gave them a little time. Let's go. Let's figure this out. How we can come to a reasonable solution that helps everybody. And they didn't do it. We're both the editor of the Cambridge Journal, and I are in the same European Archaeological Association, which has rules. And one of the rules in the Archaeological Association is that you have to be honest with the public. It's not about your intellectual property that you can get sued. You have to be honest with the public. Mm-hmm. And so I've made a claim, I've made a whatever to the organization for them to, I've charged the editor of the journal with not giving me priority to publication. And I use the journal's own standards, because they say in the standards of the Cambridge Core, it's if you freaking read it on a paper napkin, it's covered. But anything on the internet, anything on the gray matter, anywhere, he can't pick and choose which papers and books he wants to choose to have his IP case. So I made a claim, and he's got two choices. One choice is that I said let's have reconciliation. I have no issues with that. And one choice is that he gives up. He does a prior to publication statement for my work. He can choose any of them back to 2004. He can do whatever. In fact, I had a so-called peer-reviewed paper in Hungarian Archaeological Journal in 2021, mm-hmm. And so this is like in his space. I mean, this isn't rogue. This is pure archaeology in mainstream prehistory. I said, you can go from that one all the way back to 2001. You pick one, and acknowledge prior to publication. And I gave the information to the committee, and I also gave them the Nova the emails. Gave them the Nova emails, exactly what it says, and they turned them down because these guys were they were plagiarizing work, and they were not giving credit, not just to me, but to all these indigenous people that currently have this tradition that they didn't want to acknowledge because they wanted to have this huge discovery, which they had the media all over the world. So it's now September, I assume, was the next meeting of the organization, which I'm also presenting at, and virtually they're going to have to make a decision, and either the editor gets his act together and acknowledges prior to publication, and then we all walk away happy, or they kick him out, and because that's the rules. And not whatever happens in this thing will be in the notes, the meetings minutes of the organization. So if he doesn't get his act together before the meeting or before they make a decision, not just if they say Bernie's bunk or they say he's bunk, this goes in the minutes, and everybody can see for themselves. They can read the references to the two papers, because that's what we had the links to. They can read both papers and they can decide who had priority to publication, and everybody freaking knows who had priority to publication. And I was like shocked when I saw it. And then I learned the Nova editor contacted me a few days later. And I had previously had no contact with him. And he said, this is it. And this is the story. This is what happened. They claimed that they knew nothing, but they knew at least a year before. And then when he did the actual article in Nova on the subject, he included me to say that this Bernie did this and that. So I did get credit from the U.S. side of this. So right now it's Portland versus Gorham 0-0, and September, we'll see what happens.
Interesting.
But they can't win at this. They've lost. Now, another thing that happened in the first few weeks after this controversy went out there, people in the mainstream archaeology, they tweeted my stuff. And so I had a few thousand people read my paper in the first few weeks, which is a lot of people to read this sort of stuff because it's not in, right? And so that was your last question. How did I do in that one, Graham?
You did great. I had no idea I was hitting such a sensitive spot there.
Well, I've already won because this is what I wanted. So number one, I want priority publication. But number two, what's really important to me is that as I go forwards, people have to cite my work. They can't keep stealing my work. Okay. And whether it's on a podcast like this, whether it's in the peer-reviewed literature, whether it's a book, whether it's in my blog, you can't steal my work. You have to give me credit for it. It doesn't matter that I'm not an archaeologist or whatever you believe that makes things whatever it is. You've got to be. So no, I don't believe anybody going forward is going to steal my work, because it's very easy for them to see what's happening with this Durham versus Portland and have the result. So you had you had a few other questions. The other question was, how does this relate to I use archaeoastronomy, just like, or cultural astronomy. I don't use astrology, but really it fundamentally becomes the same thing. And on the last episode of Aeon Byte, we talked about how the cave art on the gallery of disc, or one segment of the gallery disc, was tied to the constellations, and that if you go along this panel, every animal represents the same constellation in the night sky, one by one by one by one, and not just in the night sky, but it was also tied to pareidolia in the landscape. So what I'm going to do is the next podcast I do on this, if Miguel invites me back again, is we're going to do the landscape one, the terrestrial scape, like we did for the gallery of disc, and then the third one, if we invite it back again, I'm open to do the archaeoastronomy part of this, because it is the same, because I've already done it. So we're doing replicas at this point. And the Moondog is saying, I don't want to hear this again. I've already heard this. I've heard this over and over and again. You're just bringing in new cave art, new caves, and it's the same
That's
story.
okay. Yeah, no, that's okay. Always
And
happy,
the third
always
question.
happy to listen.
Yeah. So the earlier you had one other one that I don't remember because I was going backwards.
I guess, the possibility that they were drawing from, from both of them were drawing from a previous source. The other
Oh
question
yeah,
that
okay,
they
okay.
would have is the possibility that perhaps they came down via, like, basically shore hugging ships.
Yeah. Yeah,
And worked out.
I'm not on team ships. That's like a Graham Hancock Atlantis thing, and this is the reason why. This is the reason why. Is that we didn't see any ships in those images. In fact, most of the marine animals that we did see were across the Strait of Gibraltar animals. Okay, marine animals, and we can actually tie this that they swim across the short distance of the Strait of Gibraltar, it's a few kilometers, and we can see all the animals as they walk north and they walk south. So I don't believe they had ships to do this. Okay, that's really important, and that ties into the whole Atlantis 12,000 years ago spreading the world. I don't think that if these people had ships, we'd see it in some of these images, and there's no ships. Also, the astronomy, which we're not going to go deep into today deeply, the astronomy is tied to terrestrial navigation because they're traveling by the animals that they walk along on their path, the pareidolia of the animals that they see in the mountains and the landscapes along their way, and in the constellations of the night sky. Now, you asked another really important question. I just came back to me. Is you asked, could this be Neanderthals? Could it be Denisovans? And that is a question I can't answer. But it is a huge question now in paleoanthropology and related fields, because Homo naledi, Neanderthal, well, the Denisovan man, and there's some mystery person out there in the DNA. We don't know what their contributions are in terms of this sort of stuff. Now, what we can do is we go back far enough in time, and at the point that Neanderthals cut off and Homo sapiens begin, rock art begins. Like imagery rock art, not talking about the 80,000 stuff down in South Africa, the shells, the red ochre in the shells, but the imagery is really at that time period. What there's like a Neanderthal camp, and what they keep trying to do, just like the Gorham etching people, they keep pushing back. They say, well, there's no Homo sapiens here, then therefore it must be Neanderthals, and then they get pounced on 2 years later when someone pushes back the dating of Homo sapiens with some sort of remains. But yeah, so this appears to be a human thing. Doesn't mean that Neanderthals didn't see art, that they didn't see pareidolia in their world. Doesn't mean that Denisovans didn't see constellations in the night sky. But what those people didn't do, is they didn't put it in the underground, the world below their feet, the underworld. They didn't do that. And that is like the strangest thing ever. Why would they do this? And we talked about that actually in the last program, so we don't have to re-answer that. Moondog's already got it, but that is what makes us so unique, is that we have these planes, the underworld, the terrestrial plane, the night sky, that we've connected all the two spiritually. It doesn't mean we're any smarter. In fact, I said, why the heck do you need to go below the ground to create all this artwork when you can just see it in the night sky? And you can see in the pareidolia in the world around you. You don't need the underworld. It's a symbolic representation. And so Neanderthals not having cave art in the other world to represent their stuff doesn't mean that they didn't have the right stuff. And the same case of Homo naledi, or in the case of Denisovans. But we don't have a record of them doing it. Now, is there something about their DNA that landed in our DNA that made this happen? It's possible. Completely possible. But they didn't do it like we do it. Nobody does it like we do it better.
Nobody does it better. The spy who loved you, huh? Like heaven above you.
Well, we're on a British theme today, right?
No, truly fascinating. And yes, thanks for the super chat, Paul. Glad you're enjoying the show. Yeah, this is fascinating. So somebody mentioned it's rewriting history. Are we exaggerating, or how does it rewrite?
No, we have completely written history.
The fact that we have a world civilization, which nobody
we have a Eurasian civilization, without any question, going back to 36,000 years ago. And then what we have is what we talked about in the last program. We talked about the Lakota, right? The Lakota.
Yeah.
And we talked about their astronomy, how it connects with Eurasian astronomy. That's so the people lived in Beringia, the intersection between Asia and Alaska, 25, 30,000 years ago. That's when they were living there. And then they dropped down as the glaciers receded. Okay. Or some people came along the coastlines. So we're in the same zone time-wise. I can't match their cave art, but I can match their astronomy. But in this one, we've got we have now connected Europe to Asia. So did people really leave? Was there really an out of Africa? Moondog, that's a question for you. Was there out in Africa? Keep you awake.
I have my doubts as to whether it's out of Africa.
People went back, or people never left. They were going back and forth.
For those who might not know, what is the out of Africa theory?
So the out of Africa is that people, Homo sapiens emerged in Africa, and then they spread out from there to the world.
Right. Okay. Right.
And well, the problem with that whole thing is that was based on Southeast Africa, and on fossils of pre-Homo sapiens. About 6 years ago, there was a major find in Morocco called Jebel Irhoud, and they dated Homo sapiens, big heads, large brains, to over 300,000 years ago. Okay, and so then you start asking, was it really Southeast Africa or is it Morocco? And Morocco is only a few hours swim from Iberian Peninsula. So where is the nucleus of this Homo sapiens story?
Right.
So yes, it was fed. Multiple sources fed into this water jug, or the moonshine, or the jungle juice. Multiple sources fed into it, but the drink flowed from there.
So now we think, well, now there's a civilization. There's no origin. It was just...
There's no origin story.
Yeah, fascinating.
There's no origin story. The origins, because as far as we can go back in time, now with this cave art, like reasonably identify characters in cave art versus a few scratches,
right,
we can now connect people on Africa, Europe, and I'd say Indonesia as well. It's the same time frame. Okay. And so the answer is that who are we? We all are one. We all come from the same places, and some were along lines. Some became a little shorter, some a little taller, some get darker, some a little lighter. Right. Some people got huge ears, some people got big noses, and some people got more fashionable noses and ears. So we're one. Well, we are the world. What was that song? We are the world. Graham, can you sing that song?
Oh no, you do not.
No, please.
No. What I do want to say is I think out of Africa can be recovered if you push it back to Homo erectus. And you say that it was Homo erectus who went out there, and then you had all the other subsequent populations of, sort of like a multiple out of Africas. You had Homo erectus going first. Yeah.
So we can talk about, there could be an argument made of Homo erectus out of Africa, but then where did Homo erectus go to Morocco with other peoples, other homos, and then is that where we synthesize, or do we synthesize someplace else that we just don't know about? Is there fossils 350,000 years ago in Zambia or Congo or wherever? It's possible, we just don't know. But this how we became humans as we know of humans today was at least 36,000 years ago, or long before then. And it wasn't. Yeah.
Go ahead, Bernie.
It wasn't Caucasoids in Europe.
No, I was going to say it looks like that worldwide, Eurasian culture was that Mustarian culture that lasted 160,000, about 40,000 years ago, which was then, replaced by the Aurignacian, which was the one that started your cave art that you're talking about and all. And that seems pretty consistent there. So you would have had a transition roughly 40,000 years ago. And unless my geology is failing me, that's that Naples volcano that, the one that took out Pompeii and Herculaneum erupted right about in a super eruption about 40,000 years ago. Going to tag on those.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's in the we're in the same window. In the Mysterium, we're talking about tool technology and Organasian tool technology, which is different than artwork. And but yes, we're in the same window of time. And there's Mysterian tools on both sides of the Strait of Gibraltar and Morocco and in southern Iberian Peninsula, or actually the whole of Iberian Peninsula. But yeah, there's who were the Organasians, which is based on tool technology, and who were they before the Organasians? Because the Organasians were not the birth of Homo sapiens, but they were birth of a tool technology. They followed many other tool technologies, so they're followed by many other tool technologies. So where did the Organasians come from, or did they not come from someplace, and they were fed in by someone brought a little whiskey, some brought a little wine, someone put a tequila, and we got it. We're jungle juice.
Very interesting. Yeah, and it's interesting too how they keep pushing back history every time I read some archaeology or talk to somebody. The cutting edge, they push back Egypt, origins of man. So I know scientism wants to keep us as close together, but that's just not the way it is. Vince, do you have a question or any super chat you want to throw up there?
We do have a super chat that just came in. I will put it up. Basically, he wants to know if the stars setting on the horizon could be the inspiration for painting constellations underground.
The answer, okay, the stars setting. Well, the star. So as the constellations, all the astronomy that I've worked out in our Papillic cave art, they are focusing on the heliacal rise in the constellation. So it's just before the full constellation hits the sun. Okay, so yes, it does hit the sun. It hits the ground at the same time. So it's coming out of the underworld into the light, and then of course into the darkness for that night. So yes, the underworld is the underworld. Above that becomes a terrestrial plane, and that transition there takes us into the light. And so we have these constellations that or animals that are constellations. They are the recognizable constellations. When they come into the light, they become the pareidolia objects that they're designed after, and then they go back into the night sky, and they are the constellations, and they go down into the ground again. So we have this circle of. But yeah, that's a really good question, and you're spot on. And the last episode we did, and probably a few before that, but definitely rewatch the last one, because that answers that question and shows the scheme. And everything we saw today, all these animals have the same, and all these depicted animals in these caves have the same narrative, the structural narrative of the below the terrestrial plane and the night sky and the pareidolia on the terrestrial plane. That's another program that I need to get organized, but it's too nice out there now.
Yeah, well, get on it, because people got to steal your work for the future.
Oh, that's all right. Well, I'm okay. So I put it out there, and anybody can Google the stuff. But be sure, everybody, July 17th, Cave of Bones, Netflix, and watch it and see if you see anything different than the program you've seen today. And I haven't seen it, but I do know that it's not that everything you've seen today is in terms of the interpretation is not in there, but those guys know about it now. So I'm kind of excited to see how quickly they can pull it together, because they have to retake the images, and then they have to find people, just like they found skinny people, cavers, to go down there. They need to go find people who do well in embedded figures tests, who see
neurodiverse people too. Yeah,
they need neurodiverse. They need to see the trees through the forest, and that is not a.
Do they have? Is that cave very accessible? For people 36,000.
No, you can't. Ago? Zero. Oh, for you. So actually, it's an interesting story. The deepest part of the cave there was no, other than someone having stepped on the fossils after Homo naledi, they were fossilized, which I'm going to say is Homo sapiens 36,000 years ago. There's been shifting of the rock. So now you've got to be, to get down to that chamber, you've got to be equivalent of like 5'6" and weigh about 70 pounds.
Wow.
And really narrow shoulders. But long time ago, you didn't need to be, because there was the sediment had dropped in to a larger place. So in the distant past, Homo naledi time, they didn't have that problem.
How about
They didn't have to
vertical?
Oh yeah,
drops and
there's
things?
well, now it's pretty. Now it's major. I think you have to drop down like 15 meters in one spot through a tight, really tight shaft. And if I mean, you're on a harness, but yeah, it's
But they didn't have
people could
harnesses,
die
though.
doing this.
Yeah, how could they get down there? I'm wondering why
Well,
would they make that kind of effort?
So Homo naledi and Homo sapiens time period, 36,000 years ago, it was open. Those material had dropped into it, so yeah, it was open. But why would they go into that? Well, you could say the same about the uphill at the caves in Europe. They're deep. Some of these images I've shown on these panels are there, with the lights on and all the stuff taken out of the path. It still take you 10-15 minutes to get to them. Because all these cave images that have these, what I'm going to call these constellation patterns, they're all out of the light zone. As the super chat person asked, they had to be out of the light zone so that when it moves into light with the lack of rising of the constellation. So it had to be in the natural dark. But yeah, nobody on this panel today will ever be able to go into the cave. But this cave, nobody really wants to go either way, because it's really dangerous, and people just be telling you what to do anyway.
Yeah, man, it'd be like, remember, guys, The Empire Strikes Back, when Luke goes down in the cave and he sees Darth Vader, fights Darth Vader. Be something like that, wouldn't it, Bernie?
Yeah, it would be something like that. Yeah, but it won't be your inner self that you're projecting. It would be.
Well, that's the whole thing, right? The cave is the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
It's a place of the underworld, the womb of life, all that. So humans were definitely always tapping into those vibes. And you don't think do we have any evidence from South Africa to Indonesia that people could use sea technology, for lack of better words, or would that be out of the question?
We actually, so Indonesia, people did, like, I don't really know the dates, but it's like 90,000, 100,000 years ago. People went to Australia, and they had to have small boats to do it. There's a big difference between small boats going across that water and taking the western side of African coast from Gibraltar down. Those require ships. They like real ships. I'm not seeing the images. We have no evidence of it like anywhere, but we see migration routes that are tied to animals, and that animals that are in pareidolia in mountains and other geological formations that are on the terrestrial plane. And we can see where they cross the water, where they swim across, such as the Strait of Gibraltar. We did remember Jebel Musa, the Moroccan woman, and we saw the animals on the Rock of Gibraltar side. By the way, if I didn't say it earlier, is that Gorham etching is in the Rock of Gibraltar, and it's a cave in there, and that's why it parallels, which is really cool, because it parallels the El Castillo cave. So where it's the same people in the same place. We can date the El Castillo cave to about 36,000 years ago, based chemically, based on the walls. So that's a no-brainer. This is El Castillo cave is not 230 to 300,000 years ago, and Homo naledi made all three. We can absolutely date one of those 3 panels.
Amazing. That is so cool.
And you heard it first on, well, first my blog, but then AEM Byte, Gnostic Radio.
Yeah. Well, hopefully your blog won't sue us for stealing.
No.
For stealing.
IP, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, by the way, it was an archaeologist told me that you gotta chase this thing down. And that prior to publication, I had never heard of prior to publication before. So you gotta chase this thing down.
Yeah.
Because
no
my
kidding.
issue is that is that if I allow this to slip by once, it'll always slip by. And I've got a lot of stuff out there. I have a lot of stuff that continue to go out. The acknowledgement needs to be made in the same way that I give acknowledgement to Indigenous peoples for their work. We have to. There are rules to the game. And give that one to Ben Bacon in the UK.
Yeah. Are you planning on any new books, or are you just going to keep blogging? Because before Orion, it's been a while.
Well, if you write a book, you get 4,000 or 5,000 copies, right? Maybe 10, which is a lot. How many people listen to a podcast episode?
Well, this one, yeah.
Why
this
the
one
heck
will
spend
get
years writing a book when you can have meet your audience in a podcast?
Yeah.
But actually, someone's writing a book about me. We're going to Spain in September to visit caves and climb some mountains, and have some cider and wine and seafood. And there's a Spanish writer. He's going to write a book about my perspectives on just about everything we talk about in these podcasts, and it's going to be called Mi Amigos, and it's going to be my perspectives as I've spoken like Miguel. So I say, well, Miguel said this and Miguel said that, and this is what I think. So it's all going to be like a lot about Miguel, a lot about the Moondog. That's right. No, it's going to be he just might say my perspectives on the type of things we've talked about in the podcast, and the book will presumably be in Spanish and English.
Oh, very cool.
We're going to spend a week with them.
Yeah, very excited. Should be a good one.
Nice,
Awesome.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we've been talking for years, and he's a good guy. He's a fabulous artist. So he's going to illustrate it. He's good. He's the new next Picasso. But yeah, I will be known in Spain among people who read these sort of books. The occult section.
El Bernie Taylor.
Yeah.
El Macho. I
Macho,
think
yeah.
I see one super chat. Thank you for that, Post Bunny. We're no strangers to love. We know the rules, and we appreciate your
Mystery.
Yeah. Well, as we get to the end, Graham, any last questions, or Vance, any last questions, remarks?
I'm just blown away by what Bernie had there. I'm still processing it and seeing how it fits into everything. I thank him for the opportunity to be here front row as he's revealing everything.
Are you going to watch the documentary, Graham?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I was wondering, before the 36,000 year mark, what was the previous thinking as to, what that number was? 25,000, 20,000?
Oh yeah, yeah. It was there was a new way of dating the cave art that came about in maybe 2015 or something, 2014. Can't remember exactly. And there wasn't, so people were just making up as they went along. There wasn't a good way, so people would just call out. So the French would say, mine is 30,000, and the Spanish would say, well, mine's 31,000, and the Portuguese would say, we don't care because we don't have good cave art. So it was really people were just throwing stuff, literally throwing stuff out there, and there are better ways to do it today.
Via the geology, like you were showing the sediment
geology.
layers, right?
Well, actually, not that. What it is these are all limestone caves in Europe. I believe they're all limestone cave, and their limestone secretes calcite. And when the calcite can be dated through uranium series. So if the calcite is over the rock art or over the art, let's say something red or whatever, it's at least the art is at least as old as that date. what happened at about 2015 to 2021 with this Indonesian art pops out. It's really old. Nobody saw that one coming.
Mhm.
It was because the new dating, the methods of dating, and there was some caves, and this was the theory before this new way of dating, uranium series dating, is that the simplest art was the oldest stuff, and then the more advanced stuff was, of course, the newest stuff. It makes complete sense. Well, it was just the opposite. It was just the opposite. And so there are winners and losers and all this stuff. The books literally had to be written because the dates were all mixed up. And so all this the French saying mine is 40 and then the Spanish saying mine's 41 stuff. Yeah, maybe that worked out, but it didn't work out for those same caves because the dating methodology was completely faulty. Like by 15,000 years faulty for some of these. And but there are really big winners on this, and one of the winners was the El Castillo cave with this gallery of discs. And that's what drew me to it, because I already did the 17,000 years ago stuff in biological time. That was the stuff that Bacon was arguing about. Then I'm basically saying I don't care about IP, I care about prior publication. Well, that was 17,000 years ago, and when this El Castillo came out at 40,000, I was like, wow, let me see if I can find the connection between the two. And then the Gorham etching as well, because I was working on these like geometric figures. So it was the change of the dating, the new technology, the new approaches that brought me to reevaluate this, which completely. So I came out with a different perspective than everybody. And with this perspective, I changed the story. And now I have people claiming that my stuff is their stuff and all kinds of things.
They don't want to agree with you. They just want to steal your work and claim they were the
origin.
the
Durham University, Ben Bacon, Paul Petit team, absolutely. And I've put it out there. So what I hope, so we have documented in this program today, we have documented at least the partial interpretation of these Homo naledi cave images. This becomes evidence. This becomes a record that, because we know what their Netflix is going to come. Actually, they don't know it, right? They just got burned on the peer-reviewed papers and the peer-reviewed papers, pre-peer reviewed, and they have their Netflix thing coming out, and they got the people on tour. We know what they're saying, and so this becomes evidence in the record that it was from these eyes to your ears and first, yeah. But no, I actually believe these guys are cool. The Homo naledi people, I've read their books. They're inclusive types. They bring in all people from all circles. They see differences and how skinny people go in the caves and fat people sit on the chairs, and they're cool. They bring in all kinds of people in, and I give them a lot of credit. They didn't have the right people on the team, and they had no clue about how to analyze cave art, because these guys they're bone people, they're monkey people. They have no idea how to analyze cave art other than what they saw, read in their books, their textbooks from back in the 80s. The world's changed, and this just wasn't their niche. And then on top of that, they didn't bring in people who have demonstrated the ability to really work these images. And I'm not the only one. I'm one of the few living people, but there's some people in the past who have worked on these that are really, really good.
Great answer, and thanks for sharing. Well, I think we better wrap it up. This has been amazing, and again, it's always great to learn, and always great to understand that no matter what you think is going on, things can change in a heartbeat. History is always changing, and reality itself. So, first of all, Vance, I'm glad you made it, and I hope you are wiser.
Yeah, me too. It was interesting. Don't know much about it, but I know more about it than I did before.
Amen. And Graham, thanks for showing up. Always a delight when you can join us.
Oh no, always a pleasure to be here, and this one's special because Bernie was hitting my sweet spot.
Yeah, this is definitely your wheelhouse. And last but not least, Bernie, it's always great to have you on the show. We look forward to the next one, and good luck with your trip on September to España.
Yeah. I want to hear about UFOs in cave art next.
Yeah. Well, when I see if I see any, this will be the first program that I bring them on.
And
All right.
Bigfoot too. If you run into Bigfoot, you better call. We'll have you on immediately. So that's it. That's it. And for the audience, thank you very much for your questions, your support. The Chatico seem to be fine. Yeah, please support the show. Please support independent creators. Let's continue finding the truth. Individuals like Bernie, those are the ones who are game changers in this world. And it's for the better of humanity and for the expansion of our consciousness. So we will see you guys later next week for our show on Artemis. And in the meantime, as always, have a good rest of your week. And yes, write your own gospel, live your own myth. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.